Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Culture Clinic on creating and building high-performing teams whilst working remotely. Thank you so much for joining us today. So before we get started, I'd love to just go through some things to bear in mind in the session. So first of all, the clinic will last approximately 1 hour, and please do place yourself on mute for the session. The messaging feature can be accessed using the chat option at the bottom of your screen, but please do be aware that when asking questions, other attendees will be able to see your name. And lastly, the session is being recorded and this will be made available to you. So many of you will probably already know Elisa and Lula, who are senior HR advisors here at Charlie. Between them, they have 15 years of HR experience. And we also have the lovely Finola joining us today as our guest speaker. Fin is our people and talent manager, and she will be giving us some insight into what the Charlie team do to create and build a high-performing team whilst working remotely.
Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining again. So over the next hour, Elisa and I will cover what high-performing means, what are the characteristics of a high-performing team, how to build a high-performing team, and then our people and talent manager, Finola, will talk about what we do at Charlie to build a high-performing team remotely. And finally, we'll have our Q&A session. You can ask us any questions as we go and just use the chat function to do that, and then we'll do our very best to answer them at the end. There'll be quite a lot of information shared throughout the session, so what we'll do is after the session ends, we'll send over the slides, but we'll send you a one-pager with all the relevant information you need from today's clinic. So to get us started, we wanted to ask a question: what does a high-performing team mean to you? So we want this to be interactive. So if everyone can please pop their initial thoughts in the chat box. What does this mean to you? And I'll read some of them out. Hitting targets. Yeah. Lisa. Oh, motivated and engaged.
Motivated. Figuring out the hybrid or remote as the way forward is difficult, achieving goals, working well together.
Ambitious, being aligned to achieve goals, people feeling excited and fulfilled by their work, feel part of the team. I like that.
Collaborative and innovative, achieving goals consistently, good work ethic, getting on together and delivering set goals and feeling part of a team, and foremost, and achieving goals.
I feel like everyone's already given me the answer. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Really good definitions. I think for me personally, I've always considered that a high-performing team refer to a group of goal-focused individuals with specialized expertise and skills who collaborate really well, innovate, and just consistently produce excellent results. However, that's just obviously one definition of what a high-performing team can mean. I think it's completely subjective, and I think it means different things to different people, and there's no specific definition to describe it. But I do think there's characteristics and traits that this group of people all have in common. So I'll hand it over to Elisa just to walk us through what some of those characteristics look like.
Thanks, Leila. Morning, everyone. So to continue then, I am going to run through some characteristics of high-performing teams, and I want you all to think about whether your teams have these similar characteristics. The first characteristic then is understanding the company's vision. High-performing teams usually are really clear on the company's vision, and they find this vision really motivating and exciting. They also know the part that their role has to play in creating that vision too. If you do this really well as a company, you should regularly share your mission and company vision with the team and be open and honest about any roadblocks that you have faced or might face, and be clear about any change in strategy or direction as you go along. The next characteristic of having a high-performing team is that your team feels valued and listened to. This could be done in so many different ways, whether it be in one-to-ones, company-wide meetings, or in Slack threads. If your team feels that they can openly give feedback to the wider business and that they feel listened to, they're more likely to perform better at work. I suppose this leads me quite nicely onto the next characteristic, which is that high-performing teams build trust through relationships. If you have really good relationships with your team, they're more likely to trust you and know that you'll have their back and support them no matter what. If your teams feel supported and have trust in you, again, they're more likely to support better. The next characteristic is around teams who collaborate frequently and effectively. If your team members collaborate a lot in person or remotely, they're likely to feel a true sense of belonging within the company, and this should make them feel quite comfortable in group settings so that they can really express themselves freely and then suggest new ideas and thoughts.
Thanks, Elisa. So this slide is just a continuation of some more high-performing team characteristics. So the next characteristic is appreciate and encourage diverse thinking. I think it's easy when you're growing your team to be so tempted to only look for people who fit into your idea of what high-performing means. So you might be focused on looking for a specific background or a skill set, but the truth is, to build a team that performs at the highest level, diversity is like so important. A high-performing team isn't really made up of well-rounded individuals. It becomes well-rounded by adding different perspectives, strengths, and experiences. So if you hire different types of people, it allows you to sort of leverage each of their unique strengths, experiences, and then build the most diverse and adaptable team. So moving on to the next characteristic, which is learn and adapt. If you want to build a high-performing team, you have to create a culture of continuous learning and development. This is because high-performing teams have this sense of curiosity. They always ask questions, they want to experiment, and they want to adapt based on what they've learned, and they're always looking for opportunities to grow. This leads on nicely to the next characteristic, which is open and clear communication. So high-performing teams are, really sharp and focused. They value clear, timely, and effective communication. As a business leader, you need to make sure everyone is on the same page. You have transparent processes and channels for communication. For example, at Charlie, we use Slack for our normal day-to-day stuff, but important updates and information is shared on our company Notion page. And then lastly, looking at the final characteristic, which is give and receive feedback. High-performing teams value giving and receiving feedback, and you need to create a safe space where this can happen in your company. Prior to me joining Charlie, I've never worked anywhere where giving or receiving feedback was a thing. In my previous job, I would never have felt comfortable to share any feedback because I just felt like that wasn't the culture. And it just made me feel like I was on eggshells most of the time. And obviously that kind of led to me feeling a bit disengaged. So coming from that type of environment to now joining Charlie, it was a bit of a transition for me just to adjust and work somewhere where, my CEO was always asking for constructive feedback. He's always asking a question, how can we do this better? And I think seeing that definitely has made me feel quite comfortable to share my views and opinions. And equally, I'm also very open to receiving constructive feedback myself, because I know it's always coming from a good place. I trust my colleagues to have the best intentions for me. I think that's really important in doing so when you're trying to create a high performance culture. I think everyone needs to feel safe, and I feel like there needs to be trust within the teams, and for people to feel like, I can share some hard truths and it's not personal. And I think this stems from the leadership team in the business. I think they play a crucial role in fostering this type of culture. If the leadership team show that they're open and they're receptive to receiving feedback, and they're always happy to listen and act on it, that will inspire and sort of nurture high performing teams.
Would you the person that fabulous, perfect. So yeah, how do we actually go about then building a high performing team? The most important thing to do when you're building a high performing team is to make sure that you hire the right people. The first thing in doing this is having a really, really good job advert, which stands out. In a job advert, you would generally outline a bit about the company, the key duties and responsibilities, the skills and experience that you need, but also the ones which are desirable as well. Don't just think about job specific capabilities and experience, but also have a think about the soft skills that will impact the team's dynamic. On job adverts, we would always recommend for you to be transparent about the salary bracket for the role and also include a list of the benefits that you offer to attract a wider range of candidates. Once your advert is ready, advertise the roles as widely as possible using as many platforms as you can. The more you advertise the role, the more likely you are to attract more diverse candidates. Before you start the interview process, we would always recommend that you speak with the hiring team internally that you're going to be using and be aligned on the characteristics that you're looking for. So this could include the skills, the experience, but also behaviours and attitudes. You might even want to consider having a checklist that you use internally for recruitment with a set of specific questions relating to behaviours and attitudes that each person will ask for fairness as well. Once you've advertised the role, then you'll start to go through CVs and conduct telephone interviews and either remote or face-to-face interviews, the way that just depending on the way that your business works. When you're interviewing, look for candidates that embody a really, really strong work ethic and have the right skill set for the position, but also demonstrate the personality traits that fit in your high performance culture. Make sure that you're hiring the best person, not just the best interviewer. Give them a range of tasks to complete so that you can really see their best self. So it might be a case study, it might be asking them to give a presentation. This is all going to vary depending on the role that you're recruiting for and also the seniority of the role. A good idea is to take them out of the interview zone, maybe take them for lunch or for a coffee, and hopefully in that environment, you'll start to get to know them a little bit better. Make sure that you get your wider team involved in the recruitment process. At Charlie, we have a meet the team section of an interview. So this means that you can get to see how the candidate communicates and interacts with other team members, and you can also get more feedback from the candidate as well. The more feedback that you have on a candidate, the more of an informed decision you can make about whether they're a right fit for the business and for the role. The most important thing is that during the whole process, make sure that you treat candidates like customers. Try and give them the best recruitment experience possible. The more candidates enjoy the recruitment experience, the more likely they are to want to work with you. We've all had that rejection email 6 months after applying for a role, and it just doesn't give you a great impression of the company that you've applied for. Once you've found the right person that fits your criteria and behaviours, make an offer. After you've made an offer, always make sure you confirm it in writing and then send the contract of employment as soon as possible.
Thanks, Elisa. I completely agree. It's really important to have the right people when you're building a high performing team. In this slide, I'll talk about why communication is key in building a performing team remotely. Throughout this session so far, we've touched on communication and the role it plays when trying to build a high performing team remotely. I mentioned earlier when we were looking at the characteristics that high performing teams are sharp and focused and value clear, timely and streamlined communication. So it's really important that you set communication processes from the start, which will then allow everyone in the business to be aligned. It'll help make sure important information is shared with the right people at the right time and nothing significant falls through the cracks. Another reason why it's important to have streamlined communication is that while it's tempting to flood information all at once, this can actually be quite counterproductive. So it's just about being mindful on how and when you share information and what channels you use to do this. Something else to bear in mind with high performing teams is that they need to understand their role in helping the company fulfill its vision and how they can achieve the goals. So this information needs to be communicated well in advance, and I think it should be somewhere accessible for them to also see. And lastly, when trying to understand how teams work, we know teams are all different, but they do have one thing in common, which is that their success relies on effective communication. So if you communicate effectively, you'll create a shared understanding and meaning and a common connection amongst the team. And having this shared understanding will help create that solid platform for trust to be built. And trust in leadership is one of the key contributors to high employee engagement. As we all know, engaged team members are more likely to put more effort into their work, which then increases their overall performance and productivity.
Thanks, Leila. Yeah, completely agree that trust in leadership is one of the key kind of contributors to high employee engagement. I suppose this leads me quite nicely on to the next slide then, which is to make sure that you have inspiring leaders across your organisation. Leaders can be anyone in the business, not just people who are line managers or function heads. Generally, inspiring leaders gain the trust of the people that they work with. They communicate often and really transparently to keep people informed and up to date. They're also vulnerable and human, and they treat other people like humans too. Inspiring leaders will listen to team members' concerns and issues and then jump in to help resolve problems. They're also really consistent in the way that they act, and they always follow through on what they say they will do. As an inspiring leader, like Leila mentioned before, it's so important to be inclusive and make sure that you're never leaving anyone behind. If you work completely remotely, your team could experience isolation, especially where you're in a role where you don't have much interaction with other people. Just some general kind of tips then for leaders are, one, to make sure you over communicate rather than under communicate. This could be by reiterating things over email or Slack, especially for people who have maybe been away on holiday or off sick. Just make sure that you jump in on a phone call or video call when written communication gets quite confusing. This is just going to be a really easy way to make sure that you are clearly sending your message across. Get to know how your teams are feeling by having regular check-ins with them individually, and then use these check-ins to determine whether they need any kind of individual support. Encourage team members to share their views, opinions and ideas so that they really feel valued and listened to. And then finally, give your team the freedom to collaborate and also to be able to solve problems without you as well.
Thanks, Elisa. So on this slide, we'll look at how to best use performance management as engagement tools. I think to start, we need to probably understand how can we improve engagement, and then look at the tools you use to help you create a high performing team. So there's definitely many different ways you can boost engagement in your company, but I'll talk about 4 areas that I think will make great impact. So firstly, communication. Without trying to sound like a broken record, I can't stress enough the importance of communication when building a high performing team remotely. In the context of performance management, there should be frequent, consistent, two-way communication with your teams. I think the best way to do this will be to hold regular one-to-ones. So line managers should meet with each of their team member either weekly or monthly. And in those one-to-ones, you need to make sure that those conversations are a two-way street rather than the manager just simply dictating priorities. Fortunately for you all, we have a one-to-one feature on Charlie that allows team members to take charge on leading those one-to-one conversations. With this feature, it places the responsibility on the team member to dictate the talking points and sort of set the agenda for the meeting. And it also holds the team member accountable for their own personal goals. And then moving on to sort of the next area that I think will boost engagement in your company is growth and development. We know the world of work has changed. Now more than ever, we expect and want more from our jobs. And if our jobs are not motivating us, or we don't feel like we're learning or we're growing, it's quite easy for people now just to move on and find another role. And with the current state of the job market, it's really hard to hire great talent. So when you do have those people in the room, you've got to make sure you're helping them grow and develop in their roles. And it's really important that team members feel like they're learning these new things and advancing in their careers. In a performance management context, this can be achieved through managers and team members spending some dedicated time discussing career goals, building out a personal development plan that will help to build sort of the necessary knowledge, skills, and behaviors to achieve those goals. Most companies probably do this once a year as part of their annual appraisal. But we would probably recommend this happens at least twice a year just to maximize engagement and performance. Most of you probably are already using the Charlie HR software, and our review feature is an easy way for you to kind of hold your appraisals and have it all stored in one place. We even have templates on there to help with the questions you want to ask throughout this process. If you're not using the review feature on Charlie and maybe would like someone to give you a bit of a demo on how to use it, please do come through our live chat or email your advisor, and we're more than happy to kind of arrange that for you. Moving on, I think another way to boost engagement is through recognition and appreciation. So team members need to feel appreciated and that their ideas are heard and valued. One way of doing this is always asking for feedback. You can do this monthly or quarterly by sending out employee surveys. I think from like a performance management context, there should be processes that kind of incorporate regular feedback, at least every so often, rather than managers saving feedback for like formal reviews or relying on the 360 feedback processes. And then lastly, on ways to boost engagement, I think it's important that there is trust and confidence across the board. Team members need to feel like they trust their leadership team and have confidence in the company's future. It might seem like it sits kind of outside of the scope of performance management, but an important aspect of this is that this trust and confidence and openly sharing like the business goals for the future will help teams resonate with, you know, what the priorities are. And I think it will have a great impact once people understand and it kind of translates to them in a way that they can actually relate to it. A good way of doing this is to get the team to come up with their own goals and maybe come up with their own objectives that will help deliver the company goals rather than just cascading objectives down to them from above. An example at Charlie, we have our company priorities set by our leadership team, but then we have our team leads and their team that will set their own key results in how they'll deliver those objectives.
Yeah, completely agree that having objectives and company priorities are really, really important, and yeah, making sure that they're shared with the team as well. I suppose this leads me quite nicely onto the final slide that we're going to touch upon, which is around making sure that as a business, you're defining indicators that will show whether your team and company have met its goals and objectives. You should be really clear around your company objectives and team objectives, and then make sure that you celebrate any successes as a business. So publicly shout out individual achievements, team achievements, and promotions. This is going to be a really, really good way to keep people motivated and engaged. At Charlie, in our morning huddles, we shout out any individual achievements, support that's been given from people in other teams or within the same team. We'll even shout out birthdays and thank yous, and it's a really, really good way to start the team start the day and feel energized. So these are our key ways then on how to build a high performing team. We are now going to pass over to Finn, our people and talent manager, who is going to talk more about what we're doing at Charlie when it comes to high performance.
Great, thank you, Elisa, and good morning, everyone. I'm Finn, People and Talent Manager at Charlie. I am part of a team of 4 in the ops team that look after our internal team of just over 50 people. As you can see, there's a lot that goes into building a high-performing team, but it's really exciting and really a privilege to be able to make to see this come to life within your company. So there's a lot, of course, that goes into it at Charlie, but I'm just going to give you a really high-level overview of what we do within Charlie ourselves. We start with identifying business goals. What do we want to achieve in the short, medium, and long term? And then what skill set do we need to drive the strategy and tactics that are going to allow us to reach these goals? But really importantly, we do not just look for skill set. It's one part of the equation, but just as importantly, whether these people are going to live by our high performance behaviours. So we've identified high performance behaviours as being give energy, drive for results, get uncomfortable, and be humble. And this is an integral part of our hiring process. And also we reward and retain based on high performance behaviours as well as skill set. Along with defining high performance for a remote environment, and for us at Charlie, we're hybrid. So we live and work anywhere in the UK, and we come to the office 6 times a year for set function days or whole company days. So to be able to thrive in this hybrid environment, people need to be able to work really autonomously. They need to be able to communicate effectively, as well as give and receive feedback frequently. So after we've defined what high performance means to us in a hybrid world, it comes down to hiring the right people. We have a really thoroughly researched hiring engine at Charlie. It's all done completely remotely. And depending on the role and the market, the hiring process is 3 to 4 stages long. And candidates that reach the final stage will have talked to at least 4 people within the Charlie team throughout the hiring process. And this is done really deliberately so we can assess for skill set, high performance behaviours throughout a variety of interview rounds, making sure we're really getting the right people for the role. We also use things like scorecards to assess question answers. We provide expertise tests to everyone, and we have really targeted questions that dig into whether they're going to be a match for our high performance behaviours. Then it comes down to looking after the people life cycle. So there's this growing movement within people operations, and it's thinking about your people operations team and their work as a product that your wider team buys into during recruitment and then continues to subscribe to until they hand in their resignation. So we make sure we're really delivering on all the basics of the employee life cycle, from onboarding to performance and development, learning and development, well-being, engagement, and more. And we do so at Charlie specifically in a way that champions belonging, ownership, and structured flexibility. But it doesn't just stop at setting the basics. We're always looking for ways to iterate, improve, and really push the boundaries on what work can look like in a hybrid world. So I mentioned before that we're an ops team of 4, and I know that probably seems like a lot to some of you for a team of 50. But there's a stat within people ops world that your people team should be about 8% of your company in total. And because we're really wanting to be at the forefront of this space, we are matching that stat. But if that's not feasible for you, a good way of approaching it is to really lean on your managers and your leadership team to embody high performing teams and what needs to be done to create them, as well as, of course, reaching out to our HR advice team at any time. So we work together as the ops team every 6-week cycle. That's how we work at Charlie, to identify ways in which we're going to create the most impact. For example, last cycle, we looked at progression and development, and this cycle we're doing a full policy audit of the Charlie policies, and a couple of the policies where we've identified as being ready to research potential ways to create more of an impact are our parental leave policy and our nomad working policy. So these are just some of the ways that we try and create a really high performing team at Charlie.
Thanks, Finn, really, really clear. So I'm just going to run through some key takeaways for this session then. So the first one is that when hiring, look out for high performing attitudes and characteristics, not just skills and experience. Make sure that your leadership team lead by example and build great relationships with their team through excellent communication and trust. Thirdly, encourage great communication and welcome feedback. Give your team the forum to be able to express their own opinions and ideas and give feedback, whether that's positive feedback or constructive feedback. Next, like Finn said, look after your people life cycle, all the way from the recruitment stages all the way to exit interviews. Make sure that your team are treated like humans and that they always feel valued and appreciated. Finally, make sure that you iterate and improve on your processes. Things are changing all the time. 2 years ago, we weren't working remotely as much as we do now. Some companies, I know some of our customers are now completely remote since the pandemic. So making sure that you iterate on your processes with the way that your business is changing is going to be really, really important. We're now going to move on to our Q&A. If anyone has any questions at all, please do pop them in the chat box, and we will do our best to answer them. Any questions? Oh, we've got someone. Thanks, Dennis. Shared a really good resource there. Yeah, a recording will be available. We've recorded the session. If you would like to, oh, Steve, if you would like to be kind of added to the list to send recordings to afterwards, yeah, we can send it over. When it comes to remote working, how do you merge people in the office with fully remote team members? I'll have a stab at answering this. There's a few different ways to do this. I mean, at Charlie, we have some people that work remotely a lot. We have some people that are not based in London, but then we also have people that use the office more. I think the first thing is making sure that people feel included. So when you're having like a group meeting where there might be a few people in the office, sit individually at your screen so that people don't feel left out. That's a really good way to help merge that kind of relationship. I'm trying to think if there's any other, Lula, Finn, is there anything you can think of in terms of being able to merge remote and people that work in the office?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's just being really deliberate about placing equal value on people that are working remotely and people in the office. So making sure that meetings are all done in sort of the format we're doing now, like Elisa and Lula are both in the office, but Lula's sitting in a separate room, like Elisa touched on. And really optimizing communications so that no one working remotely is going to miss out if they're not in the office, making sure everything's really well documented and shared thoroughly on channels like Slack or Notion or email for us, I think is key.
We've got a question, Finn, I think you might be best suited to answer. It says, I've lost it now, but it was to do with tips for interviewing remotely.
Sure, there's tons of resources out there now for interviewing and recruiting remotely. Obviously, interviewing remotely, you lose some of those in-person cues that you'll get in an interview, but it makes interviewing a lot more accessible. And I think we've seen an increase in candidates and quality candidates by moving our process fully remotely. I think the key thing is to mitigate some of the things that you're possibly losing out on if you're doing it in person, is to make sure that you are doing multiple interview rounds, you are giving an expertise test, and you're involving multiple people in the team internally, and everyone in your internal team's really clear on the hiring process and really clear on what makes a good interview.
Thank you, Finn. There's another question we have. It says, on behaviours and attitudes for new hires, do you have any tips, resources for creating a checklist managers can use to figure out? So I think that we can actually probably support you with this offline, Lauren. I'm happy to send you like a checklist that we have. So maybe that's one we take offline. Do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's definitely one to take offline. We do support you, yeah.
I think so. Comes down to assessing what behaviours and attitudes are important to you. Like, we can definitely provide a generic checklist, but what you're hiring for and the high performance behaviours you have identified as a company are going to be different to what we look for at Charlie. So being really clear on what's going to be a good fit within your company.
Thank you, Finn. Are there any more questions? Can you see any more questions? I feel like I've lost them.
With the newfound flexibility, how do you find businesses organise team members working in different time zones and make sure that everyone's included in communications? So the first thing is, if they're in a time zone where they can attend all of like the company meetings, you should definitely kind of expect that. But if not, just making sure that you over communicate. So anything that's really important, make sure that you put that somewhere that all team members can access, whether you have it on Slack, on like a channel that's named important so people know that they need to read that, whether it's via email, whether it's on Notion, depending on the kind of tools that you use. Just make sure that any really important information that anyone needs to know about is reflected there. Also, if you have any company-wide sessions which are really important, make sure that they're recorded. Even if you have kind of small meetings with, I don't know, line managers, if there's people there that are not going to be available because they're working in another time zone, then just make sure that they're recorded and shared afterwards so that they can watch it in their own time when they are working. What expertise tests would you recommend? This is really going to depend on the actual role that you're recruiting for. So, for example, when we recruit in our HR advice team, depending on the seniority of the role and how much knowledge we expect, we would do tests on their knowledge, or it could be attention to detail. It's all going to depend on the role that you are recruiting for. So you would need to think about what kind of test would be really relevant in a situation like that.
I can see one from Amanda. If you haven't operated like this before, where do you start with the existing team? Yeah, really good question. I can imagine it feels a bit overwhelming if this is a completely new concept to you. I would recommend starting with really getting tight on defining what high performing means to you and your team, and then doing a little bit of an audit of the current people in your team and the skill set they have and the resources that you have to implement some of the things that we've suggested putting in place. Starting slow, starting basic, and then iterating on them as you go. Don't try and implement everything at once. Maybe start with like getting a really robust hiring system in place and then move on to the next thing.
Finn, you've got another question. What do you find hardest about the recruitment process remotely compared to in person? That's a really good question.
It is a good question, and I actually haven't hired in person. I came to sort of like recruitment and people ops during COVID, really. My role pre-COVID was more, didn't have a huge amount to do with the recruitment. It was more the people ops side. So yeah, remote hiring's all I've known. And I think it works really, really effectively. I probably think the main thing is the sort of mannerisms and, like I said, in-person body language and cues that you miss out on. But having like a video on for at least 1 or 2 rounds of your interview process is really, really important. However, one thing we do to mitigate bias is we always have our first round phone interview with video off. So it's just verbal to try and minimize any implicit bias we have. And then we go to video on, and having those multiple rounds by the end of it, hopefully you get to know the person pretty well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And then I think one final question is, do you use or recommend psychometric tests? So we don't actually use them at Charlie. Now, personally, and happy for anyone to disagree, but I do feel like they can disadvantage a lot of candidates. If you have maybe tech tests or other tests which are more specific to a role, you are giving someone more of an advantage to really show them their true selves. Psychometric tests are very generalized, and they are not going to help you in attracting the best talent. They're just going to help you attract someone that's really good at doing those tests. So that's my kind of personal opinion. I wouldn't use them personally, and I also wouldn't recommend our customers to use them either.
I completely agree. Elisa, there was something I was thinking about that we recently had a conversation on, which was providing interview questions to candidates beforehand. Just wanted to ask, I guess, everyone what their view on that is. Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat box as well. Would you use it? Would you share interview questions beforehand? Just curious to know. Oh, great. Dennis said we do some already. That seems to be something a lot of people are interested in now. I've spoken to a few of our customers actually who said they've started doing it as well. Finn, is that something you can foresee Charlie adopting or possibly doing?
Possibly. It's definitely been something I've been interested in researching. Another thing that's really interesting is some people are getting rid of the CV stage, and instead of CVs, they're asking people to answer 3 or 4 really targeted questions, and then based on responses purely rather than background at all, they're choosing people to go through to the next round, which I think is a really interesting concept. A lot of the time experience doesn't equal expertise, years of experience, and a lot of the time you're subconsciously biasing people based on stats that you see in their CV. So yeah, it's another interesting thing that possibly watch this space for Charlie.
That sounds so exciting. I think definitely from even a diversity perspective, like there's a lot of people who would benefit from having the questions beforehand, just to make sure that they interview really well. I don't think I have any more questions.
I don't think we do. Shall we move on to the final? Yeah.
Thank you. So we would love your feedback for this session. So please do complete the feedback form that will be posted in the chat box now. And thank you so much for attending, and a big thank you to our speakers as well. You have been amazing. And if you'd like to learn more about how Charlie can help you, please do come through to your advisor or come through our live chat. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.